So in part 3 we're going to take a look at the damage to this rear quarter panel on this Vauxhall Insignia, see if we can get that repaired up. Obviously the damage does go just inside that door shut a little bit. You can see all the arch line and the edge of the door line there is a little bit off. So what we're going to do for this is use our GYS system. We're going to get this clean back to bare metal because there's another repair there that's been done previously, and then when this has been smacked, the filler has obviously cracked and left a few issues there. So the first thing that we need to do is get all this stripped back to bare metal. Now throughout this video, for some reason I did this whole job without wearing a mask, and it's not something that I would advise. You do need to make sure you do wear the correct PPE when you're sanding and grinding and stuff like that. This is just one of those jobs that I did late on at night and I just wanted to get it done and get home, but I have to say I did have a little bit of a rough chest the next day. Now we've got all this cleaned up, so the first thing that I'm going to do is knock all this out from the inside and get everything back as close as I can with the panel beating hammer. Then, utilising our GYS system, I'm going to start pulling all this back out. Now I have to say, this particular line up the side of this car was a lot stronger than I thought it would be. Normally our GYS system would absolutely tug something like this out. But up the side of this panel here, across this arch, it was a very tough spot on the car. So it did take me quite a few attempts to be able to pull this back out and get it back in line. Now GYS does have what they call a drawer liner, which I've put up on the screen there, which we are looking currently at getting, which would help us out with slightly heavier body repairs like this. It just make it a little bit of a stronger pull and give us a lot more purchase to be pulling something like this out rather than just using the standard bar or a slide hammer, which you'll see me using in a minute, because this really did take quite a bit of tugging. So in the end I ended up using the pins and a 14-pound slide hammer to pull all this corner section back out, and it took me a few attempts. So I was working around the different areas one by one, doing a little pull, a little pull, a little pull, just getting everything back in line and getting the shape back. And eventually, with a bit of persistence, it paid off and we got this as close as you would get it. And I was quite happy with where it started off to where we got it. This isn't really worth putting a quarter panel in for this damage. For what this repair was, it was perfectly good enough to repair it like this, pull it out as close as possible, and then get it to where we felt it was at a decent stage where we could get some filler in and start some work on it. So after using the heavy duty pulls on the keys, I roughly marked out on the arch where the swage line should be in this and started working across this with the spotter. Now obviously I've not included the whole pulling footage or the whole spotter footage. I did spend quite a while actually on this quarter panel trying to get all this quarter pulled out so that I could put the least amount of filler possible in it. And working round nice and slowly. You see I went down there and I went across it once and then I came back across it again, and I'm just trying to work all these low areas one by one, just trying to bring everything back up as close as I possibly can to minimize the amount of filler that we'll be putting in the car. And it did take quite a while actually to do this repair. I probably spent, I don't know, maybe about 2 hours just on the actual metalwork side on this, trying to pull everything out, trying to keep tweaking it. You see now I'm just going around the arch line again, just hammer and dollying that arch curve in to make sure that that's nice, because what I don't want is to put a build up of filler on the edge of the metalwork there, because that would leave obviously a really thick arch edge to that quarter panel, which is one thing that I really do not want at the end of this once it's done. I've gone across, I keep doing little pulls, tapping the high spots down, a little bit more pulling, a little bit tapping the highs down, and you can see there it is getting now pretty close to where we want it as far as the shape and also getting the low spots pulled back out. This center section I think is where it's been damaged before, and where the previous repair was, and by the looks of it they hadn't pulled it out at all because it had stretched a little bit. So I spent a bit of time working this center section, bringing it up, tapping it back down, and just trying to get this as close as possible as I could to where I wanted the finished metal on the car to be. Also making sure that where these edges round the sides there are, that we just round those back off and try and keep everything as neat and possible as we can. So with a little bit more pulling and also a little bit of lead filling, we lead filled all up that edge there to bring the quarter panel just back in line and lead filled that center section where that main bit of the low damage was. Now we've got it pretty close, so we can have a look at starting the sill where there's the little repair on the sill. Now to start off with, I pulled the bottom part of the sill out using the keys, and then I just used a little bit of the squiggly wire inside the door shut just to bring the inner back in slightly, because once we pulled and tweaked the outside of the sill out like there, then it just needed a slight pull on the inside with some squiggly wire and this frame again, and we were able, fortunately, to pull all the sill back out in line and get that nice even gap from the edge of the door and the nice body line down to the sill. As I said, I probably spent maybe about 2.5 hours actually going through the metalwork side on this to try and get everything as spot on as I could and as close as I could, so it needed the least amount of filler possible. So there, that's after the pulling stage. You can see now that's nice and back in line with the bottom of the door, whereas previously obviously it had that large bend, and so did the bottom of that center pillar that had quite a bend in it, and everything now is back nice and flush. The inside's back nice and flush, and once we've lead filled the quarter panel, that was all nice and close. We've got rid of the low spot in the middle, and we've lead filled all the way up the edge just to bring the door shut back out to where it needs to be. Now I know lead filling is a bit of an old school method, but I have got a video coming on that soon for you guys. So the actual bodywork stage, I started off by just chucking a really rough fill of some heavy filler in there and using a 40 grit just to knock all this back and get the rough shapes back in on the car. Now I know there's going to be some comments on this that's saying that, you know, it looks like there's a hell of a lot of filler going into this quarter panel, but in reality, and I'll show you at the end of the video, 90% of this filler at the end of this job is actually in a great big pile on the floor, because it's surprising when you put filler in just how much you take off. And I have to say, it did take me a couple of attempts to get this quarter panel right. There is a lot of shapes going on with this quarter panel. There's a lot of swage lines. You've got the arch line, which the arch line tapers off into nothing. You've got the line from the bottom of the door that carries on in, and you've got the sill and everything to deal with. So there was a lot going on in this repair. So the actual body side of this, I probably spent around about 2.5 hours on the filler stage for the door and the sill as well. But we got it all roughed in first with that heavy filler, and then the next morning I came in, I put a little bit of fine filler over the heavy filler because the night before it was getting late and I was just struggling with my concentration as far as getting the right shapes in there and getting it all flushed in and getting everything nice and even. It just got to that point at night where I was struggling a little bit. So as I said in the Porsche video, there is that time when it's just best to walk away and come back the next morning with a clear head and a fresh night's sleep and just crack on. So I came in the next morning, and in about 45 minutes I had this whole arch fine filled, all the edges smoothed out, all the swage lines cut back in. We got the interior edge on the door jamb all smoothed out where we've done the lead work and where we've filled all that. And at the end of it, I have to say it was a really nice repair. It's going to look really nice once it's painted up. The next stage, to be fair, on this car, we'll probably get it in the booth, get the front and rear bumper off, we'll get some polyester spray filler over this quarter panel repair and probably on that sill edge as well, and get this side prepped up and get everything ready for paint and blocked out and primed up and whatnot, and get it all masked out so we can paint these door shuts and leave everything nice, because we don't want any paint edges where this quarter panel's been painted before. There's a really bad paint line inside the door shut, and obviously we've got the repair going into the door shut, so it makes more sense just to whip these two outside doors off, paint the door shuts and get everything back in nice and clean. So this is the very final stage as far as the filler work went. I've just drawn the arch line back in with our tool, and I'll leave a link in the description to that if you're interested. And also the GYS system that we've used in this video, I will leave a link in the description to that as well. We're just going through the final last little block now, making sure that everything's nice and smooth, making sure that this blends in really nicely to the body line on the door, and also making sure that our repair blends out nicely into the quarter panel, because when this has all been repaired up, we want this to be a nice Seamless repair. We don't want someone to stand there and say, well, I can genuinely obviously tell that that quarter panel has been painted. Now, during putting the fillet into the quarter panel, I put a little bit of fine fillet in the sill, blocked all that out at the same time. As I was waiting for the filler to dry on the quarter panel, I was working on the sill just to minimise the amount of time that I could spend on the car. And at the end of it, I have to say, everything's come together quite nice. And already, now the interior is clean, now these new doors are on, now this quarter panel is repaired, it's already now starting to look like quite a nice car. We just need to strip the front and the rear bumper off, get those sorted out in the next video, and get obviously this side repaired up and get this ready for paint. So there is the final view of the quarter panel. See, all the gaps are back nice, everything's nice and flushed together. We've got the swage lines back at the top and at the bottom that runs off the door. The repairs done to the bottom of the sill, everything's blended in really nicely there. And also the sill section that was damaged, we've pulled all that back out, and it only needed a very minute amount of filler in there, basically where we'd had the pins and where the panel beating marks were. And we've also just done a light skim inside the door shut along that edge, just to make sure that everything's nice and smooth and everything's nice and neat. So once we're painted inside that door shut, it'll all be nice and clean and no damage or any ripples inside the door shut. And as I was saying, there is an absolute huge pile of dust, and bearing in mind this has already been brushed up once, so this is only half of what came off the car. So I hope you guys can join me in part 4, where we're going to get the car in the booth and start some of the paintwork prep work. Bye for now.